Just a few words about myself. I have actually one of the few people that really have shifted my my work experience between politics and the business life. And I've been into politics twice, and I've been outside politics twice, and now I'm outside politics. And I've been working actually on the local level, on the national level, and also in the government. And I've always been working with communication and strategy issues, and both in terms of national elections, but also European elections. And my best results has always been on the national elections. I don't know why, and I don't know why coming here. But I quit actually politics 2.5 years ago, and since that I have released 3 books on strategy and future-oriented matters. But I'm also the vice chairman of the SOS Children's Villages. So when I'm speaking here, I can speak both in terms of how politicians actually react into pressure, but also from an NGO or a pressure group, how we think from a more strategic level there. I will start a little bit with because I think it's always important to start thinking about what environment does politics and politicians today navigate in. And I think there are some things that happens in the world today that is affecting how politics and politicians actually respond to public pressure. I think one thing is very interesting happening right now, and that is actually decreasing the power of public pressure, because we live in a time with what we call, or the American call for big data. Today it's possible actually for politicians or companies to monitor and understand citizen people in a way which was not possible just a couple years ago. So when it's possible actually to compile data on people's view, on people's opinions, that is a new tool, but it's also a new risk for politicians. So I think that it has never been better times for politicians who really want to understand citizen and public pressure than we have right now, because we live in a global world where all knowledge is open for everybody, and we're always increasing how good we are in actually understanding how people think about things. But the most difficult thing, and that was my experience in politics for all the years I have worked, is that when you're discussing about public pressure and how people respond to things, people and human beings and people like us, we can only relate to things we have experienced. We can only relate to history or to what's happening right now. Politics is very much about the future, to understand if we are taking decision A or B, what will happen and how will people respond to that. And that is much more difficult to find out, and it's much more difficult also from a pressure point of view. So what I mean by that is that we also live in a time which I will say it's much more foggy, and foggy in the meaning that as citizens or as politicians, we much less think that we know how the future is going to look like. We live in a time of much more uncertainty coming to, I would say, almost all political areas. So politicians, but also citizens, pressure groups, we all have to navigate in a time with much more uncertainty. And politicians have to make decisions about uncertainty. And we know one thing about people, it's impossible to ask people about things that hasn't happened. So what I would say is, I think one thing that is very important for politicians in relating to voters, citizens, pressure group is intuition, to have an intuitive way of understanding what is happening and what is moving around in the public opinion. You can use data, but you also have to have your own curiosity and dare to make decisions. I think there's another thing happening right now in the landscape of communication that is also very important. When Gutenberg and internet came, it was possible for one person, one party, one pressure group to communicate with a lot of people, and we got the society of mass communication. But what actually happens the last 10 years with the rise of social media is that suddenly a lot of people can communicate with a lot of people. So everybody has the possibility to communicate with a lot of people. And that is actually transforming the landscape for communication. And I left communication and in politics 2.5 years ago. And at that time, it was still very much about, we looked at ourselves as a government or as a party, and that we have tools to reach a lot of people. But what's happening today is that the landscape has developed to a lot of conversations going on all over. We all have conversations with each other in different fields. And what you actually have to do when you respond is to go into these conversations, to listen to them, to understand, and to have a dialogue. So it's a very different landscape today for politicians to act when coming to this pressure group. And the last thing I think it's important looking into this question is that I think that we have a lot of very, very challenging issues for politics to solve the coming years. And we also live in a society with increasing complexity, where we have a lot of pressure groups with a low threshold to get the voice. But as a politician, you always need to have a holistic approach, also to look on the side how things are going to be financed, what happened in the long terms, etc. So the logic for politicians to be holistic will increase, and the complexity in the society, especially in relating to everything with the labor market or the terms of the economy, is increasing. And there we will see a rising gap, I think, between decision-making in policy and the life of pressure group, and especially in a media landscape where the threshold is so low for people to contribute to something. You just push a button which is called like, and you're part of a movement. And what does that movement means today? So that's a little bit background. It's a difficult society, difficult communications landscape for politicians to enter and navigate in. So I think on the one hand you can say that politicians has never been more naked in terms of open and vulnerable for pressure group. But on the other hand, politicians has never have better tools actually to understand how people react and what people actually think about things. So, I will now go through how I think that politics can respond to public pressure. And I have to say that when I was in politics, and that was for 10 years, we gave a lot of thought about this. We thought and discussed very, very much how we should react to the world around. How should we react to pressure group and voices which were organized, voices that were unorganized, voices that were commercially biased, etc. And I think that as a politician or as a government or whichever position you have to define your own strategy on this issue. And I think the first issue actually to discuss is, are you going to be an opinion leader or are you going to be an opinion follower? It's possible to do both things. But I think that a lot of people who are in politics out of some sort of value or to actually achieve something. And what I think is important, and this is very difficult to make a distinction, I think that politicians has a responsibility, and it's important to listen to what worries people, to the areas that people think that politicians should respond to. But then there is a difference between listen to that and listen to what policy people will see implied. And I think looking into politics, politics is very much always about policy. What measurement to be done, what action to be done. But politics for people always starting with the questions, do we live in the same society? What is the worldview that is our starting point? And I think listening in terms of what engage people is very important. But the road going to be populists is about also listening what actions people want to be seen through. So I have one example of this that is, for me, illustrates this quite well. In the days we had the debt crisis, in all countries where we have car industry, we had huge problems. And in Sweden we're a small country, but we have had two car brands. Now we have one brand, but that's owned by Chinese. But what's happening was, of course, that the demand for cars went like this, and it was a lot of problem. And the pressure from the public was enormously on the Swedish government that we should go into this this car industry and with money, but also to take over and become an owner of the car industry. It was enormously pressured in all media, pressure groups, emails, all channels. But we decided to do something else. We decided not to do that, and we decided to be very, very clear, because our policy at that time was that the state of Sweden is not a very good car owner. We think that other ones could do that better. And what's happened then was extremely interesting, because I was working then in the Prime Minister's office. I was State Secretary with responsibility for communications. And I thought that now we're going to be hunted for a couple of weeks. That was what I thought. But we didn't. So what I understood at that time was actually that there is a difference between acting to be short-term loved or acting to gain long-term respect. And I think what we actually did there was that we took a decision that was against the public opinion, but in the long term we gained respect from it. And looking into politics, and I think that if you should understand how politicians act strategically, you have always bear in mind, I think, that successful politics is also about taking decisions that are sometimes against public opinion, but gains long-term trust. So it's very important not to have a short-term relations only to this. So that, I think, first to define your strategy. How should I as politician relate? And I think that most politicians have a discussion about this. What type, how much opinion leaders are going to be, and how much are we going to follow the opinion? And the truth for everybody is, of course, that you are somewhere there between. But I think it's important to see that. And the other thing you have to do is, and this is very important, as politicians, you have to find your way of listening to people. And you can either do that proactive, with your own idea to do this, or you can do it reactive. If you do it reactive, you're sitting in your office and you just see, and then the pressure groups has the power. If you have your own way of listening, for me, and this was the first national election that I was responsible for was in 2006. And in the election campaign into this, and I'm in the moderate party, which is in the center-right party. And in the election campaign, I think it was like 3 weeks until the elections, we had a very, very big discussion in Sweden about property tax. Because we said that we want to take property tax away and have another fee, but it was very good news for all people with properties. But then the opposition, the Social Democratic opposition, came with a proposal, and media pointed out that their proposal was even better. So we had a crisis. And what's happening was that everybody in our party said to us in the leadership that you have to do something. We're going to lose the election all over. And everybody said that. And they said that everybody is speaking about this question all the time. But what we did then was actually that we stood against this a little bit, and we actually listened to what people, not inside the party, but outside the party. And they talked about totally other issues. So what I mean with this is that from a politician's point of view, there are risks at both ends. It's a big risk just to cocoon yourself and just listen to the people around you. Because the people around you are always very much the same as yourself, and you get a very, very strange worldview if you do that. If you go the other way around and just listen to the pressure group, you only get the views from those who are best organized. So my point is actually you have to find your own way. And what we did, if I just say, was a little bit untraditional. And I have spoken with a lot of prime ministers' offices around all of Europe, and I never heard anybody have done this. But when the Swedish prime minister decided, when he came in office, and he was in office for 8 years, he decided that one day every week, I'm going to travel to some city in Sweden, and I'm going to sit down with people and discuss and listen, especially people working in schools or elderly care or healthcare, not with the bosses, with people working on the ground. And this was very, very difficult, I have to say, from a media point of view, because everybody wanted to participate in this meeting, the directors, everybody wanted to show big PowerPoint slides and everything. And what we did, but we actually succeeded with this. So we did that one day every week. So that was a way for us to get the input from people, to listen to day-to-day life, to listen how people articulate. We also did that. We had every quarter, we have a different theme. So we also had a political idea with every quarter when we did this visiting. We visit young unemployed people, people working in schools, people who were entrepreneurs. So that was also a way of learning. But it was a very, very structured and strategic way of getting people's input. And of course, for me as a communicator, this was like wonderful, because we can find the words, the phrases that people use. And my opinion is that also speak a lot with strategic people in parties and in government, that this is something that people are discussing very much, because we live in a time where everything is going to be digitized. And what's happening then is the value of face-to-face meeting is increasing, and the value of face-to-face meeting in politics is increasing. So I think, even though the topic here is very much how to deal with online pressure, I think that when everything is going to be digitized, everything that is digitized can also be copied. So we see actually the value of everything that can be digitized is decreasing, and the value of face-to-face real unique experience is increasing. And this is very good of value for politicians. And the other way around, if you want to have impact on politicians, you have to give them face-to-face meetings, you have to give them experiences that are outside what can be digitized. And for myself, for example, when I was in politics, I had also a very unconventional way of listening. I followed popular culture very much. That was my way of like finding what is moving, because everybody in popular culture, music, television, everything, you have to be very, very broad, and you have to be very, very open to what's happening around people. But I know that people does this that way, and of course parties and governments are working also very much with quantitative data, both polling and focus groups, of course. But my point is that from a political view, if you are proactive, you can find your way actually of how you are listening and having a dialogue with people. Another thing that is extremely important in this issue is, of course, because every pressure group, everybody who contacts politics is trying to have an impact, is trying to change decisions, to have impact on decisions. And what politicians always do, and this is like a continuous discussion that never ends, is to analyze different issues and analyze in which terms they actually will affect public opinion. So what I say is that if you are a pressure group, if you are able to affect public opinion, you will be very successful. If you're not able to affect public opinion, you're not possible. And what is public opinion? Public opinion is a very abstract way of defining things, because a public pressure group that, for example, mobilized 10,000 people on the internet, that is a public opinion. But you have to define it as something broader. And I think even though we're now moving from a more analog to a more digital communications platform, I think that traditional media is still having a very, very important impact. And I think the combination of digital pressure with traditional media is very, very important. And I still think that the absolute majority of politicians react much more to traditional media than to online media. And I remember it so well. When I started working politics, it was like I think it was 1994. I was like 24 years. I lived in an apartment. And every morning when I heard the newspapers fell down in the apartment, that was for me the starting point and the end of every day, because that was the war. And the war now is something very much else. But what you see is also that we see new politicians actually is developing that has a much more positive and takes a pressure group and online much more important. But in these terms of analyzing, I will give one example from a pressure group in Sweden that I think it's the most successful almost in the last 10 years, and that's the trade unions for teachers. And the trade unions for teachers, and this is interesting, they have been lobbying, and they have been very active in the media for like the last 10 years, and they're always saying that we have to raise salaries for teachers so we can attract more teachers, etc. And what they did actually, that they were so successful, not on the pressure group side, but on the sides in the public opinion. So what's happening was actually that all societal problem in Sweden, not maybe today, but for 1 or 2 years ago, the policy for solving everything was about teachers. So how to get rid of crime, just raise salaries for teachers. And what's actually happens, and this was the crescendo, that the leader of the Green Party in a TV debate, he said that because we have two trade unions for teachers, he said that the Green Party, we are the third union for teachers. And I think the importance and what you can learn from this is actually you have to affect public opinion. And if you affect public opinion, people really want to do things with you. And another thing of looking into this is that when politicians, I think they're quite restrictive, but sometimes politicians actually make alliances with pressure groups. And when they do that, and this is a typical thing, I think all political parties in Sweden have written like editorials with some of the trade unions for teachers. So, and my point is that, of course, when you are at the NGO or pressure group side, you're making a lot of effort into this. How can we be successful? How can we be visible as a pressure group? How can we take a public interest? But I will say as well that you do that as much from the political side. So when you're looking into this from the receiving line, because we speak about that my experience is actually from the receiving line. I have been there where everybody's trying to affect us, get the money from the budget, etc. But you have the same type of discussion. And you always have a discussion about, okay, this 100,000 people who has emailed us now, is it just those 100,000, or are they like a result of something bigger, and something bigger that we will see come? So there's always a discussion about an opinion is always something that happens right now, but also part of something that can be moving and developing over time. So don't be static. I think you always have a much more of a dynamic perspective. And I can say the tool that politicians always work, because I think that in 9 out of 10 times, we don't think that the pressure groups are relevant for us, because we think they are having the wrong topic at the wrong time with the wrong demands. And what you always do from politics is that you're trying to shift focus. You're trying to get focus on other issues. So there are always a fight between which issues are going to be relevant, which issues are going to be discussed. Just a few words also about, because I thought being on the other side, not on the receiving line, but trying to affect politics, I think that there are something that is important in looking how you can actually affect politics and create a dialogue. And I think that giving politicians a solution, not just criticize, I think is key. And I think another thing that is very much key is, and that is if you look into all topics, that, and I think that this is something that everybody does when it looks into society. You look, if you have a demand, if you have a topic, if you have somebody saying something, you start with asking yourself, does this organization, this company, this individual, this group of individuals, do they say this out of self-interest? Or do they articulate this in the public interest? And my experience, been working with this for like 10, 15 years now, is that as soon as you define something to be in the public interest, in an interest that is outside yourself, then you're starting a process of actually affecting things and have impact of things. And I often think about the farmers, because that is most clear for me. As the farmers are very, very active pressure group, and I think they are that in all countries. But you can actually see, if you look into Sweden, you can see the farmers' message in 2 ways. Either you can say that we are farmers, we have to have subsidies because we have to survive. The price of milk is very low. We have to continue to be farmers. That's in the self-interest. But you can also say that what we actually do is that we provide, in this case Sweden, with open views. It's not only forest all over. We look into the wonderful Sweden that everybody loves. It's in the public interest. So you always have to move into public interest. Looking in the company side, the same thing. Corporate social responsibility. You're moving outside your self-interest to more of a public interest. And as soon as you are in the public interest, politicians start to listen and respond to that. So I think that is very much key. I would just last say a few words about internet and digitization out of a political view, because I think often the question is raised as it is here, under pressure, how politicians should respond to public demands. And the precondition for that statement is actually that politicians are reactive. Politicians are doing things, and then we have a public pressure on politicians. And of course, today we see a lot of this focus in terms of migration issues, labor market, etc. But I think that politicians also can have a much more of a proactive approach to use internet. And if you use the new possible measure that internet provides, you also have a much better position when the pressure groups are coming on internet. And I will have 2 examples of this. The Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs, the former one, Mr. Carl Bildt, he's very much into using internet. And when he was actually became Minister of Foreign Affairs, he started to communicate on a blog as a main communication tool. And of course, the department and the the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not very happy because everything was on the blog. But he just started to do that. He just started to do things on Twitter. And what's happening actually was not only that he thereby created his own media, he got a very much a broader target group, but I would say that he was in a much better position talking when pressure groups came to him on the online area, because he was there, he was proactive there, he was defined as a very open politician. So I think that we will see more and more on that, and I think we see it already. And the other thing is, then I can say the today's Minister for Cultural Affairs in Sweden, she's a very interesting person, and she's been like a TV host, etc. And she's using, especially I would say, Instagram to get people to know her. And what's happening actually with the way of using digital is that you can be able not only to speak about topics, because the worldview in politics has been that we are in the field of talking about topics, messages, and what's happening with the social media and the digital world is actually that you can get people to know you. And if you get people to know you, and she's very, very personal on this Instagram account, I can say. But as soon people get to know you, they soon will get your friend. And when people are your friend, you listen to them much more because you know what clothes they have today and everything. We know the logics. But this also affects how you can handle pressure groups. And she's Minister for Cultural Affairs, and I would say that will be one of the fields where we always have a lot of pressure groups, because every artist is a pressure group and has tool actually to criticize you every day, and they do that. So I think that we live in a very interesting times with there creates every day new possibilities, but also in a world where the power for the politicians who has a proactive approach has never been better. You can today define your way of listening, relating, define your own medias. So I end there. That was a little bit from the receiving line perspective. Thank you very much.